On June 9th, Edward Snowden's identity was revealed to us all via the Guardian newspaper on his request, and in the weeks that ensued, there was a worldwide debate about the role of security agencies, and especially those of the US, and this prompted a debate of the role of intelligence and the right to privacy in Western life.
As the leaks continued, the scale of the surveillance implicated a number of prominent corporations, and many of America's allies, including Britain, France, Australia and New Zealand. Given the West's proclivity for lecturing less developed nations on their civil liberties records, the hypocrisy is palpable. Despite the enormity of the PRISM programme, the news was received by many with nothing more than a resigned shrug. In an age where people willingly broadcast much of their lives on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, is it even that strange to think that the government are keeping tabs on us? What do you think, Jazza?
What do I think? No, in short. I think I fall into the category of people who was just like, oh, spy. Okay, let's move on. Like, so, I understand that people are probably disappointed with the fact that their governments have maybe been spying on them. Actually, wasn't it found out that the PRISM project wasn't actually collecting data on US citizens without warrants?
I haven't heard that actually.
I think that's one of the points. So they're not. So US security agencies aren't legally allowed to collect any data on US citizens without a warrant. The problem was that applications for warrants in the past, however many years, in recent years, not a single request has been turned down. So that shows how rigorous that is.
Well, I think it comes back to a much longer argument that people have about what the relationship is between the government and the citizen, which is something we'll come on to in greater depth later in the podcast. But it seems, I understand, I've been watching videos and people's responses to this, and there does seem to be this feeling that it wouldn't have been so bad if it had been agreed on first that they were collecting this amount of information. I mean, the Patriot Act in the US somewhat laid the ground for. Actually, the Patriot Act, I think, is several different acts that are renewed each year, but it laid the ground for a lot of what Edward Snowden revealed, and it is a bit of a concern, really, the idea that governments are compiling huge databases. I mean, not particularly.
But they're not compiling. So this talk that we're having now over Skype. So this is being listened to. Well, it's not being listened to, but it's being collected by the PRISM project. If what we interpret as the PRISM project, what we assume it to be, is true, but they're collecting data about the data. So they're not actually recording our conversation. They are they've recorded the fact that I am talking to you for this amount of time. They don't have anything about the content of the kind of stuff that we're talking about. Do you think that makes it better? Do you think that kind of gives them a little bit more leeway if they're not actually listening in on our conversations?
It obviously is better that somebody only. I mean, it's the difference between keeping track of somebody's movements and actually, attaching a bug to them. Basically, that is the difference. So it is better, but I mean I feel slightly similarly to you about this. I feel that there is a certain security need. I don't think particularly from terrorists, although there's obviously been some successful work in the past couple of years.
Oh, don't call it work.
Well, it is work, isn't it? It's
9 to 5.
Probably not 9 to 5, but I mean, you've seen Spooks, haven't you?
I haven't. I've never seen Spooks. So let's gloss over that gap in my popular knowledge.
Well, you know what it's about, right? The general gist of it.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a need for intelligence agencies to work, but I think the bad thing about the way the US government has gone about it is that they've done all this without really asking the American public whether or not they want this to happen and to what extent they do want it to happen. So I think that's the major problem.
The way that I see it is that they kind of have asked for this to happen because they've democratically elected people who have okayed this.
But it's not as if there's a wide variety of candidates for the average American to choose from.
We'll go on to that later on in the podcast as well. But I think that one of the worst things was the fact that Obama came. Like when he was running for election in 2008, he was very much he came across as somebody as one of the candidates who was much more anti population surveillance than people like Hillary Clinton and people like John McCain. They were seen as like the people who wanted to maintain the levels of surveillance that were occurring, and Obama landed on the other side of the camp. It seems like now that he's into his second term, he can. Well, he's saying that, you should have expected this to happen, surely. And it seems like I remember something about Nick Clegg when he first took the job as Deputy Prime Minister. He said that if he had known the amount of knowledge that he did about national security as he does now, before he became... he was a major player in politics before, but let's be fair. But now that he's, in power, he would have wanted for stricter rules on surveillance and stricter regulation on this kind of field. So I don't think it's... I think that we're kept actually reasonably safe by our governments, and to be honest, I made a video about this, and I was like, well, the only thing that they're going to find out is that I'm searching for the members of the boy band Blue topless. That's literally the most incriminating evidence that they could have about me, and now it's out in the internet. So, good luck, Prism.
I mean, that does come back to the whole argument of so long as you have nothing to hide, why are you worried that people are looking? But I think it is reasonable for a citizen to expect a certain amount of privacy and to assume that their data isn't being, automatically farmed.
But that is happening anyway. We both live in London.
But it's a bit different for, if a private corporation is doing it, even a private corporation as big as Facebook, say, compared to if a government agency is doing it.
But I'm thinking about CCTV. So London is the most watched city per population in the world in terms of CCTV cameras.
Yeah.
That just happened. We didn't ask for that, and the majority of them are actually private owned, but they are used, even the private owned ones, are used in tracking down criminals, being able to track the movements of people who are victims of crimes before and after the crime has taken place. They've been a really useful tool in security, and obviously this is mainly internal security, but the amount, that was another thing that many people argue can encroach on our civil liberties.
I mean, but as you say, they're privately owned, so there's not really a particular danger.
But they are used by the police.
I mean, yeah, but the police have to request them, don't they? It's not as if there's, again, as I said, a database being built up of all these little clips or even reels of people's lives, basically.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit. It's the equivalent of the police coming around to someone's house and asking if they've seen anything, but if they've seen anything through the lens of their cameras. So it's different from if a private citizen is taking images of in and around their property than if a government is taking images of, every street in London. These are different things, really.
I think you're probably right. In terms of this topic, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but we're now going to move on to the legitimacy of democracy and whether internationally we should all just live under a dictatorship run by me. So we'll see you on the other side of this.
We used to drink bottle gins and